It took exactly 47 seconds. 47 seconds for a career, built on calculated allegiance and selective truths, to unravel beneath the unforgiving fluorescent glare of the Senate Judiciary Committee. The room smelled of polished mahogany, aged paper, and the faint metallic tang of anxiety. Cameras lined the walls, their red recording lights blinking steadily, a silent chorus of witnesses to the impending fall. Every chair, every polished tabletop, seemed to hold its breath. Kash Patel entered first, a man whose calm demeanor had weathered political storms before. His dark suit was impeccable, his tie precise, yet the subtle tremor in his right hand betrayed a human fragility he had long concealed. Across the room, Senator Moskowitz sat like a predator cloaked in judicial authority, his sharp eyes scanning Patel's every movement. The senator's gavel rested lightly on the desk, ready to punctuate silence or to strike. Staffers whispered behind screens of legal briefs, their glances flicking between the men like hawks tracking prey. The committee room was a theater of authority. Floor-to-ceiling windows let in the late-morning Washington light, casting long shadows over the marble floors. The hum of fluorescent panels overhead blended with the faint click of microphones, a constant reminder that every word uttered would be recorded, dissected, and remembered. The air was thick with anticipation, because this hearing was about more than a single document. It was about integrity, trust, and the fragile scaffolding of power itself. Patel's aides placed folders neatly before him, the topmost bearing the notorious Epstein list, supposedly vetted, supposedly legitimate. Senators murmured quietly as they flipped through their own copies, the pages reflecting a spectrum of authority and skepticism. Every glance seemed loaded, a slight raise of an eyebrow, a tightened jaw, a pause too long before responding. Moskowitz's hand hovered over the list, tapping faintly with precision, like a metronome counting down the moments before exposure. The room seemed to shrink around Patel. He attempted a polite smile, one meant to diffuse tension, but the lighting betrayed him. Sweat formed at his temples. A pen rolled slightly on the polished mahogany, a tiny, almost imperceptible tremor that seemed to echo loudly in the sterile silence. Each senator's gaze was an interrogation before words were even spoken. Staff quietly adjusted microphones. Cameras zoomed in on faces, capturing the smallest flinch, the slightest hesitation. The legal advisors in the back whispered citations under their breath. FISA 702, Appropriations Act, the Fifth Amendment, all legal lifelines Patel hoped he wouldn't need. But the document in front of him, the Epstein list, was not just questionable. It was fabricated. The truth, concealed in small print and selective disclosure, would become his undoing. As Patel cleared his throat to begin, Moskowitz leaned forward. His eyes, sharp and deliberate, cut through the tension. He tapped the list once, twice, with measured patience, the seconds stretching like thin ice underfoot. Somewhere, in the middle of that room, the fragile veneer of control began to crack. And then, the waiting began. The stage was set, the audience silent, and the first question, innocuous, calm, deceptively measured, was about to pierce the heart of Patel's carefully constructed narrative. The Senate chamber, with its gleaming marble, solemn portraits, and weight of precedent, held a single truth. Authority had come to test him. And the silence wasn't over yet. The hearing began in a rhythm of measured calm. Senator Moskowitz's voice, smooth yet unyielding, carried across the polished chamber. "Mr. Patel," he began, his gaze fixed like a lens, "can you confirm the origin of this document labeled Epstein Associates that you submitted to the committee?" Patel cleared his throat, the tremor in his hand now noticeable as he adjusted the papers before him. "Yes, Senator. It was compiled by our office from various open-source intelligence reports and verified contacts," he replied, each word precise, rehearsed, but lacking conviction in its cadence. Moskowitz nodded slowly, leaning back just enough to make Patel shift in his seat. "Verified by whom, specifically? And under which federal authority did this verification occur?" The question hung in the room. Every staffer, every journalist, every camera caught the micro-expression on Patel's face. A slight twitch of the eyebrow, a tightening of the jaw, a fraction too long before the answer. I believe by internal compliance teams, Patel stammered, glancing at the folder. His voice was steady enough to seem professional, yet the flicker of doubt betrayed the careful facade. Senator Alvarez, seated to Moskowitz's right, interjected softly. Are you aware that presenting unverified or falsified documents to the Senate constitutes a violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1001, the federal statute prohibiting false statements to government officials? Her eyes didn't waver. She waited for acknowledgement. Patel's lips pressed into a thin line. He nodded faintly, a silent concession without admitting guilt, the microexpression a quiet signal that he understood the weight of the accusation. Moskowitz's tone sharpened, still calm, but deliberate. Mr. Patel, during our preliminary review, internal memos from your office referenced direct communications with intelligence contractors regarding Epstein's network. Can you confirm these communications, and under what statutory authority, if any, these were conducted? Patel shifted uneasily. His fingers drummed against the folder. The communications were advisory in nature, Senator. We were acting in a coordination capacity. No direct enforcement action was undertaken. I believed all actions were within our statutory authority, he said, attempting confidence, though the words were brittle. Moskowitz's pen hovered over his notepad. He let silence fill the room for a full 4 beats. A camera clicked. The microphone caught the faint intake of breath from Patel. Each senator's eyes were now cataloguing the cracks. Hesitation, repetition, uncertainty. The tension was almost tactile. The air itself seemed to thicken, compressing around Patel's chest. Mr. Patel, Moskowitz continued, voice quieter now, the calm before the storm. Are you aware that under FISA 702, any collection or sharing of intelligence information requires precise minimization procedures to protect U.S. persons? How were these procedures applied here? Patel swallowed hard. His mind raced. Internal memos contradicted his earlier statements. His vision flicked between notes, the senators' faces, the cameras. I followed standard procedure, he said, but the emphasis felt hollow even to himself. A soft shuffle of papers echoed from the table. The committee's stenographer paused, capturing the inflection of every word. Staffers exchanged subtle glances, the kind that signal that something is unraveling quietly, irrevocably. The first layers of defense had begun to fall. By the time the questioning moved on to funding allocations under the Appropriations Act, Patel's breathing had shifted slightly, controlled, yet rapid enough to betray stress. Moskowitz's eyes never left him. Each question was precise, a scalpel cutting through rehearsed narrative. The room felt suspended, poised on the edge of collapse. And yet, the audience, the nation, unseen but omnipresent through the cameras, was only beginning to sense the inevitability. The silence wasn't over yet. The room had grown heavier. The initial calm of inquiry had transformed into a subtle, pressing weight, almost tactile against Patel's shoulders. Senator Moskowitz's eyes now carried a sharper edge, an intensity that made even seasoned aides shift uneasily in their seats. He leaned forward, elbows resting on the mahogany surface, pen poised like a conductor preparing the final crescendo. Mr. Patel, Moskowitz began, his voice deliberate, measured. We have obtained internal communications from your office, dated 6 weeks prior, that directly contradict your previous testimony regarding the verification of the Epstein document. Can you explain why these emails indicate your team could not substantiate the list, yet you presented it as verified? Patel's fingers tightened around the folder. His mind raced through memory and procedure. Senator, the emails reflect preliminary discussions. At the time of submission, final validation had been conducted. Moskowitz's gaze cut him off, sharp as a scalpel. Final validation? According to the logs, no such verification occurred. The list was created using unconfirmed sources, including personnel who lacked clearance for sensitive intelligence. Are you aware that under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001 and the Appropriations Act, knowingly submitting inaccurate information to Congress constitutes a federal offense? Patel's jaw clenched, a bead of sweat forming at his temple. The committee room's air conditioning did nothing to mitigate the tightening in his chest. He shifted, trying to maintain composure, but the imperceptible tremor in his hand betrayed the first cracks of genuine panic. Senator Alvarez leaned forward, voice calm but precise. Additionally, Mr. Patel, under FISA 702 minimization procedures, any dissemination of intelligence regarding U.S. persons requires documented oversight. Can you show the committee where these procedures were applied in the compilation of the list? Patel hesitated. His eyes darted to the folder, then to the ceiling, then back at the senators. I believed all procedures were followed, he said, the sentence thinner than intended. The word believed hung in the air like smoke, ambiguous, legally dangerous. Moskowitz's pen tapped lightly against the table, each tap accentuating the room's silence. Belief, Mr. Patel, does not substitute for statutory compliance, he said. Documents indicate that internal compliance memos flagged the list as unverified 3 separate times. Can you explain why you ignored these warnings? Patel's throat tightened. He glanced at his notes, trying to locate any shred of justification. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the faint quiver of his lips, the rapid blinking, the shallow intake of breath. Every aide in the room leaned forward slightly, unconsciously signaling the gravity of the unfolding moment. Moskowitz leaned back, letting the weight of evidence settle like dust on polished marble. We are not merely questioning procedural oversights, Mr. Patel. You presented a falsified document to the highest legislative body in the nation. This constitutes a direct violation of the Due Process Clause and a breach of trust foundational to executive legislative oversight. Were you aware of this legal exposure when submitting the list? Patel opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence that followed was thick, punctuated only by the scribbling of notes, the subtle clicks of cameras, and the faint hum of fluorescent lights. The contradiction was laid bare, the memos undeniable, the misrepresentation fatal. Somewhere in the middle of that room, the fragile scaffolding of Patel's defense began to buckle. The tension was no longer abstract. It was kinetic, pushing against every fiber of his carefully constructed persona. The moment of truth was approaching, measured in seconds, precise and inexorable. The witnesses had been silent. The room waited. The 47-second collapse had begun, though no one yet realized exactly when it would strike. The clock on the committee wall ticked with deliberate indifference, each second a hammer striking against Patel's composure. Moskowitz's eyes locked onto him, steady, precise, unyielding. A predator counting the exact moment the prey falters. The folders in front of Patel seemed suddenly heavier, the pages almost radiating accusation under the harsh fluorescent lights. Mr. Patel, Moskowitz began, voice calm, each syllable measured, for 47 seconds, I want you to explain how you reconciled submitting a document flagged 3 separate times as unverified, under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001, while asserting it was fully vetted and accurate. Patel's throat tightened. The words lodged, stuck, refusing to form properly. His hand trembled visibly now, sliding slightly across the table. The camera lens zoomed in, capturing the subtle quiver of his fingers, the sheen of sweat forming at his temple. The room held its breath. The hum of fluorescent lights seemed louder. Pen drops, soft chair creaks, and paper shuffles punctuated the silence. He opened his mouth. Nothing emerged. 47 seconds stretched and elongated in that chamber, each tick a verdict in itself. He looked at the senators, at the folders, at the cameras. The blinking red lights felt accusatory, almost human. His eyes flickered, darting from one face to another, seeking escape, clarity, absolution, but none was offered. Moskowitz leaned forward, resting both hands lightly on the mahogany. Let me be explicit, he said, voice slicing through the silence. By presenting knowingly falsified information, you have violated the Appropriations Act, misrepresented intelligence under FISA 702, and breached your obligations under the Fifth Amendment's Due Process Clause. The legal consequences are immediate and institutional. Your testimony is no longer credible. Patel's face drained of color. He swallowed hard, the sound audible even over the low hum of equipment. He attempted to respond. Words came out fragmented, disjointed. I believed. His own hesitation punctuated the verdict. The senators did not flinch. There was no concession in sight that could mitigate the exposure. A pen rolled across the mahogany table, coming to rest at the edge, a tiny but visually symbolic signal of the collapse. A microphone squeaked faintly as he shifted in his chair. Staffers in the back stiffened, each gesture catalogued as evidence of panic. Camera flashes captured the minutiae, the bead of sweat, the tightening jaw, the momentary loss of eye contact. Moskowitz's voice remained calm, almost surgical in its precision. For 47 seconds, Mr. Patel, your entire defense evaporated under scrutiny. The law does not bend for belief. It demands adherence. Your misrepresentation is fatal to your credibility and your office's mandate. The submission of false documentation to Congress is an offense not mitigated by prior intent or rank. The room seemed suspended in a moment outside of time. Even the light, the soft reflections on the polished surfaces, appeared to pause, highlighting every line, every tremor, every sign of failure. When Patel finally slumped slightly, exhaling the weight of inevitability, the chamber did not exhale with him. The silence persisted. Absolute. It was over in 47 seconds, but the consequences, legal, political, and personal, would echo far longer. A career built over years, dismantled piece by piece, letter by letter, accusation by accusation. The collapse was not dramatic, loud, or cinematic in the traditional sense. It was methodical, precise, inescapable, and legally incontestable. Somewhere behind the cameras, a clerk whispered a single word, almost inaudible, irreversible. The silence wasn't over yet. By the time Patel left the Senate chamber, the story had already leaked to every major news network. The cameras that had captured his collapse now replayed the 47-second sequence in endless loops, slow motion magnifying each flicker of doubt, each tremor of hesitation. Anchors spoke with a mixture of awe and condemnation, their words punctuated by graphics labeling the event as a historic Senate takedown. Constitutional scholars called it the most devastating Senate takedown since Watergate, intoned one anchor, voice low and measured. Clips of Patel's flustered expressions were juxtaposed with archival footage of congressional hearings past, emphasizing the gravity of the moment. For 47 seconds, America watched competence collapse. She continued, her gaze directed at the camera as if she were speaking directly to every viewer in the nation. Social media erupted. Twitter feeds, threads on Reddit, and discussion panels dissected the collapse frame by frame. Legal experts weighed in, analyzing the violation of FISA 702, the misrepresentation under 18 U.S.C. Section 1001, and the breach of Appropriations Act protocols. Commentators highlighted how the procedural safeguards had been bypassed, how internal memos had been ignored, and how a single misstep could unravel years of political strategy. Across Washington, colleagues whispered in hallways, exchanging theories about Patel's rise and sudden fall. Staffers in congressional offices huddled over printouts, scanning memos for implications, confirming the legal exposure. Even the FBI and DOJ were noted to have opened internal reviews, examining the potential federal ramifications of knowingly submitting falsified intelligence to Congress. The institutional consequences were immediate, methodical, and unrelenting. Newspaper headlines were merciless. Patel's credibility shattered, fake document, real fallout, Washington doesn't forgive ignorance. Op-eds scrutinized the systemic failures that allowed the document to reach the Senate in the first place, questioning oversight mechanisms and the culture of compliance in Patel's office. Analysts emphasized that this was not merely a political embarrassment. It was a legal and ethical catastrophe. The Senate chamber itself remained a quiet monument to the event. Empty chairs and polished mahogany bore witness to the meticulous unraveling of a career. Staffers replayed footage in slow motion, noting the subtle signals missed in real time, the shift in posture, the momentary eye contact with Moskowitz, the micro-expressions of stress. Each detail was a lesson in procedural diligence, or lack thereof. Even within Patel's own office, the atmosphere was tense and silent. Lawyers prepared formal statements, aides compiled internal briefings, senior officials debated damage control strategies. The collapse had immediate institutional consequences, from reassignments to pending reviews of other intelligence compilations. The reverberations would extend far beyond the 47 seconds that defined the moment. As night fell over Washington, cable news lights illuminated empty streets. Analysts speculated on the next steps: resignations, federal investigations, public hearings. The moral and legal clarity was unambiguous. A career ended not through scandalous rumor, but through precise, undeniable exposure of misrepresentation and statutory violation. And in the quiet corners of think tanks and law offices, one phrase echoed repeatedly: authority demands accountability, and the law tolerates no exception. The public spectacle was over, but the consequences were only beginning to take shape. The silence wasn't over yet. Weeks later, the fallout had settled into a somber rhythm. Capitol Hill returned to its procedural cadence, committees reconvened, and the echo of Patel's 47-second collapse lingered like a ghost in marble hallways. In conference rooms, analysts dissected the legal failings, tracing missteps back to incomplete verification, ignored internal memos, and a single fatal misrepresentation of fact. Each detail reaffirmed a simple, immutable truth: law and procedure do not yield to intention, rank, or ambition. Patel himself remained largely out of public view. His office was stripped of authority, internal systems audited, and colleagues reassigned. The press periodically updated the story, not with the frenzied urgency of the initial collapse, but with the clinical precision of post-mortem analysis. Headlines emphasized statutory breaches, citing FISA 702, the Appropriations Act, and 18 U.S.C. Section 1001. Legal experts dissected how these violations constituted not merely errors in judgment, but irrevocable breaches of federal responsibility. Across the nation, law schools and policy think tanks used the incident as a case study in procedural rigor. Students examined the internal memos, the hearings transcripts, and video footage. Noticed the interplay between legal authority and ethical responsibility, professors would intone. Observe how omission can become misrepresentation. 4 to 7 seconds can define a career when procedural fidelity is ignored. Within the Senate, discussions became quietly reflective. Senators debated oversight improvements, compliance reinforcement, and documentation standards. While political allegiances remained, the moral lesson was unequivocal. Transparency and adherence to law are not optional, and no personal or political calculation can supersede institutional accountability. Moskowitz, though rarely commenting publicly, continued to be referenced in media analysis. His methodical questioning and calm precision became a benchmark for effective congressional oversight. Analysts compared the 47-second exposure to historical takedowns, noting the combination of patience, evidence, and legal clarity that rendered any evasive response impossible. It was a masterclass in authority exercised responsibly. Patel's colleagues spoke in hushed tones about ambition, oversight, and the fragility of reputation. The incident reminded even seasoned operatives that compliance was more than bureaucracy. It was the foundation of credibility. Offices reviewed procedures. Internal audits intensified. The event had ripples far beyond Patel, shaping behavior, decisions, and institutional culture. In the quiet of a late November evening, with the Capitol dome silhouetted against fading light, one truth persisted. Power is fragile. Authority is conditional. And the law is precise. Careers may ascend through strategy and skill, but a single misstep, a single falsified assertion, can dismantle everything. It is a calculus as immutable as statute, as unforgiving as history itself. Some careers end in scandal. His ended in silence. The chamber, the cameras, the nation, they had witnessed it. And in that quiet observation, the moral, legal, and political lesson remained absolute. Washington doesn't punish ignorance. It replaces it. The silence was finally complete.